to spend time with you. I am Jeff Hyman, and I'll introduce myself in a bit, but I really am anxious to get right into it, and I appreciate you carving out time, middle of the day, to find your perfect culture fit. I'm going to share my screen with you, and we will get started. And you should be able to see my screen now. So again, Jeff Hyman, find your perfect culture fit. That's why we're here. We're going to get right into the content. If you could please make sure that you are on mute, and there'll be plenty of time later for questions, Q&A, comments, complaints, anything you want to go through. We'll cover it all towards the end. But what I'd love to do is just kind of go through some structured thoughts and some strategies and some recommendations, things that I think will be helpful for you. And then, like I said, towards the end, we'll open it up for questions. We have two co-sponsors today. There will be a 60-second plug at the end for both of them, Shortlist and Venturesome, but we're not going to do that now. We're going to kind of get right into it, right into the heart of it. If I had to picture one kind of vision that encapsulates culture fit or culture match, it's this. You may recognize this from the late 1800s if you were around like I was. And I want you to just kind of remember and picture this horror story. It's really a nightmare. You've joined a company that you spent so much time interviewing and assessing and deciding and sweating and talking to your spouse or partner. Should I join? Should I not join? Company sounds perfect. It almost looks too good to be true. And you join that company, and a couple days or a couple weeks later, you kind of find that it's nothing like what you thought it was. In fact, it is a nightmare, and you realize you've made a mistake. And the same is true if you're hiring people. In fact, it's really common, unfortunately, that you can think you're joining one company, or we're hiring one candidate. You interview them, and she's perfect, and she's kind of straight out of central casting. And a week or two or three later, you find out, oh my gosh, what did I do? This person that showed up for the job is totally different than the person I hired. This has kind of been the story of my life in recruiting for 25 years and joining companies myself. It is a very common story. And of course, you know the story is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, right? From 1885. It turns out, if you haven't read it or seen the movie, the punchline is it's the same person. This scientist has some issues with chemicals and turns into a monster nightmare axe murderer killer. It's the same person. And the analogy is just so true that it's almost scary, if not funny, that in hiring or in joining companies, what we thought we were getting is in fact not what we were getting. And so the point of this webinar is to help you avoid this nightmare. That's the whole point. And so to help you do that, I'm Jeff Hyman, and I am the CEO of a company called Recruit Rockstars. It's a remote first company technically based in Chicago. And I also wrote a book by the same title about this topic, and also how to find great candidates and some other stuff. If I've learned anything that I can share today, it's because I've made every mistake in the book. I have joined companies that I shouldn't have. I have hired people that I shouldn't have. I have interviewed people only to find out 3 weeks later that it was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of situation. The stories I could tell you would more than fill an hour. The book is filled with them. So there is no magic in recruiting or hiring or job seeking. People look for this magic answer. There is none. I'm here to tell you that it's kind of the school of hard knocks. And now that I'm at an age where I'm kind of usually the oldest on the webinar, I actually have something to share, which is what I hope to do over the next hour with you. And originally I thought about doing 2 sessions. One would be for job seekers or candidates as you think about what kind of company should I join? How do I find my perfect culture match? And the second webinar, of course, would be how to hire people for culture fit. And as I started to think about this and craft the content, I found it was a mirror image of each other, quite literally. It's almost the same topic. And so I condensed it and put it into one session that I think you'll find really useful, because we are all effectively both, right? At some point in our career, we are a candidate and we are a team leader, and we're both sometimes at the same time. And unless you never have aspirations of leading a team or managing people or hiring people, I think for most of you, that's not the case, at least the survey that you took when you signed up. So I think you're going to find it useful from both perspectives. Our goals today are super simple. Over the next 45 or 50 minutes, we're going to talk about what is culture fit, how do you find it, and what specific questions do you ask to find and arrive at your culture fit, culture match. And it's different for all of us. So I'm going to give you the questions to ask, but what's more important are the answers that you hear and what you filter through your own lens, whether you are hiring or whether you are looking for your next role or both. And then, of course, we'll talk about what do you do if you made a mistake, which we're all going to do over time. I absolutely hate webinar cliches. So I'm going to promise you a couple of things. There's going to be no pushy sales pitch during this webinar. There's going to be no polls or breakout rooms or any of that nonsense. I'm not even going to ask you to turn off your Facebook and your Twitter and your LinkedIn and all that stuff. Although if you do, you might get more of the webinar, but I would never think of asking you to turn those things off. There's going to be a free gift, and I'll tell you more about that later. So a little bit of incentive to get you to stay. So with all that said, I think we should kind of get right into it, right into the heart of the matter. Just some terminology before we start, just to keep things super simple over the next 50 minutes. I refer to hiring managers or HR professionals or CEOs as team leaders. You lead a team, you hire people for your team. Maybe you're an entrepreneur, a founder, maybe you run a department, it doesn't matter. You are hiring people. I'm going to call those team leaders. And then job seekers might be a candidate or anyone thinking about their next move. Even if you're not actively looking for your next move, you're just starting to flirt with it, as some of you indicated. I'm going to call those situations job seekers, okay? Just to kind of make things a little bit easy. So why is this topic important? Why does culture fit even matter? I can't overstate the importance of it. For team leaders, it's my conclusion that culture has become the only source of competitive differentiation. If you rewind the clock, maybe to when I was starting my career, there were a lot of ways you could have competitive differentiation, a lot of bases on which you could compete with other companies. Certainly, you could compete on brand. You would build a brand and you would advertise on one of the 3 TV networks, and you'd build that brand over time, and that became your competitive moat, your competitive differentiation. Well, due to the fragmentation of media and how hard that has become to build a brand, let alone be discovered by consumers, that has largely gone away, unless you're really lucky or really deep-pocketed as your source of competitive differentiation. The second way you could differentiate back then was technology or product, right? You would develop a product and you would patent it and have trademarks, and that would be your competitive moat or differentiation. That too has alone, your inability to pay the legal bills to defend your IP has largely made technology and product no longer a key source of competitive differentiation. What is not copyable or replaceable is your culture, whether it's the culture of your team of 5 people or your company of 5,000 people. If you build a unique culture, and we'll talk about over the next 45, 50 minutes how to do that, I would argue you have a huge competitive differentiation. Certainly, you've heard the quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast. There's a reason that quote exists, and it's very true. Now, why is culture fit so important for you as a job seeker or a candidate? I think if the pandemic taught us anything, it's that life is just too short, right? To work with people that are not our tribe, not like us. And not talking about diversity. I'm talking about wired like us. And I think that's why we've seen this great resignation over the past 12 months, right? The pandemic liberated so many people in so many fields who were no longer tied to an office, held captive. They could actually pursue what they wanted to pursue. I know many of you, that's the case. And I think that genie's out of the bottle, right? It is now time, especially as a candidate, as an employee, to understand that you have the leverage right now. Now, that's going to change a bit over the coming years, but we do have a shortage of employees, candidates. That's not going to resolve itself over the next decade. And so once you find your tribe, find your type of people, it's incumbent upon you to go out and find it. And you can do that now. Maybe before you couldn't do that if you were in a small town or in a certain kind of location. So finding culture fit, whether you're a team leader or a job seeker, has really just never been more relevant, more important. And that's why I decided to kind of put this together. What is a culture? Well, what is a company? A company is no more than just a bunch of people. I think this gets lost so often in business. It's not a building. It's not your brand. It's not your product. It's not your factory. It's not your billion-dollar balance sheet. It's just a bunch of people. It's a bunch of people just like us. And those can be hand-picked and carefully crafted group of people, or it can be just a randomly assembled group of people, almost like a bunch of strangers. And when you find your crowd, your tribe, your group of people, you can finally do the best work of your life. If you're a team leader, a team builder, or you're going to be one day, I will tell you as a 25-year headhunter, it's so hard to find people that know how to build and assemble that team, that if you learn how to do that, your career is largely taken care of. I would say maybe 5% of people understand how to handpick and hand select a group of people who are interdependent and interreliant and can bring a company to life. It's that rare. It's not that hard. I like to say it's simple, but not easy. And again, over the next 45 minutes, I'd like to share with you some strategies on how to do it. Now, this is what a lot of people think about when they hear culture fit, right? As you signed up for this webinar, you probably pictured in your head this list of values that's on the wall of your office. It's probably emblazoned in gold, or it's got different colors, and it's got a picture of a puppy and a dog and kids and a bunch of stuff. And unfortunately, I hate to burst the bubble, it's a bunch of crap. It really is a bunch of crap. Even the research shows that in most cases, that list of values on the wall is aspirational. It's what some executive or some group of people put together as an aspiration for the company. These are the 12 values, the 15 values of this company. And I almost never see it actually manifest itself or actually become real. And I'll give you some strategies in a bit for how to know if it's real or how to know if it's just a bunch of stuff on a wall. But I can tell you in most cases, it's utter crap. It's not culture fit or culture match. It's a list of aspirations, which is not to say it's not worth doing and not worth having aspirations, but that doesn't help us today, where we're either trying to hire someone to fit and do well in our team, or we ourselves are trying to find the team that we can do well in. An aspiration that's going to hopefully manifest itself 3 to 5 years out doesn't help us today. So what is culture? What is it really at the end of the day? I'm a simple guy, and I like to read the research, and then I like to digest it and boil it down to a few things. And the experts will tell you that culture is just a few things. The first is how we respond to change. Some people, if you think about a spectrum, are wired to be very flexible, very versatile. They thrive on change. They love change. They cause change. Some people will say they are shit stirrers. They just love change. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who love consistency, structure, process, discipline. This is not good or bad. This is not either or, but it is a spectrum. and it does define how people tend to respond to change. When I think about different clients I've had over the years that I've been retained to find people for, I've had clients who their culture was all about change. I mean, if you looked at that company in 12 months, it was a totally different company. They just had a frenetic pace and energy. A lot of times these were startups or early stage companies, maybe venture-backed companies. And then a lot of times they were maybe larger companies, were more consistent, had process and discipline and structure. And it's not just to say big or small, although that has been a common theme for me. Another piece of culture, how we interact with each other. Some people are wired for independence. They are people who want to define their own path, who want to pave their own way. A lot of these people are entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, product managers, brand managers. They are, independently directed. Other people are wired for interdependence. And I mean that quite literally, interdependent on each other for decisions, for camaraderie. And again, it's a spectrum. And I've seen both types of people, not good or bad, just different. Culture is also how we communicate with each other. Some cultures are based on writing or presenting or speaking or arguing or debating or passive aggressiveness. I've seen it all. There's different modes of communication, which is how we as humans are just so wired, right? And related to that is how we make decisions. Do we debate? Do we discuss? Is it autonomous? Is it a consensus-driven culture, which moves a bit slower, but brings everyone along with it? None of these are good or bad, but they are all different. And the sooner you can understand your natural style, your natural center of gravity, the sooner you can begin to find a company, a team that you will thrive in. Similarly, if you lead a team, the sooner you understand and can verbalize these characteristics, the sooner you're on your path to hiring people who will thrive in your group. Now, I've added one that the research doesn't even talk about yet because it's really too new, and that is the pandemic-driven office structure change. 2 years ago, when this whole national or global nightmare began, we didn't really know how it would affect work, and I think we're still figuring that out. But what I can tell you is that our clients, at least at Recruit Rockstars, are tending to fall into three groups. There's remote first companies. And by the way, some of them were even remote first before the pandemic began. Some are office centric. So get your butt back to the office or you're out of here. And that's fine if that's, what that company needs to do. And then there's hybrid. And I don't know the exact numbers. I haven't seen data, but it feels like about a third. I add this to the list of culture because I feel so confident that at the end of the day, what we're going to find is that some people thrive in a remote first company or culture. Others thrive in an office-centric culture, and others are somewhere in between. Again, not good, bad, just different. The sooner you can understand your natural style, your natural preference, the better. And it's really hard to go from one to the other. For example, we have a client who during the pandemic used it as an opportunity to hire some amazing people across the country, but not located in the city where the company was based. Now we're hopefully towards the tail end of the pandemic. And they're saying, there's 80 of us here in Toledo, but we got 3 people out there across the country. What do we do? We're kind of a hybrid company. Do we let those 3 go? Do we force them to move here? How are we going to handle this? It begs a lot of questions. And guess what? If you are in a office-centric company or even hybrid, where most people live in that city or town and go to the office some days a week or some hours a day or some weeks a month, and you're across country, you're out of the flow, you're out of decision-making. And I hate to say it, but it's out of sight, out of mind. I'm already seeing it with clients. So it's something for you to think about as you hire, and it's something for you to think about as you think about joining a company or changing companies. So I've added it to this list, and we can talk more towards the end on Q&A about that if you like. Culture fit is a term that I've never really used or liked because it implies that there's a company with a culture, and we have to find people who fit it. And I think that oversimplifies things. For the rest of this call, I'm going to use the term culture match. It really is like a marriage or a friendship or a romantic relationship. It is a culture match, and it has to be a two-way match for it to be successful. So we're looking for culture match. The other reason I don't like culture fit is culture fit leaves out the concept of culture add. A good friend of mine, Brad Feld, who's a venture capitalist, uses this term of culture add in that, sure, people that we hire have to match our culture to be successful, but ideally, you want them to bring something new ideas, new structure, new discipline. They become culture add, not just a culture fit. So I like the word or the phrase culture match as our goal. Now, here's the success formula. Again, I've learned this the hard way. I've made every mistake in the book. And what I've realized is it takes two parts. I used to think that skills match or competencies were enough for rockstar performance. And by the way, let's define rockstar performance as top 5% performance. The book talks a lot about that. It's not just a cheesy word that I made up. We were trying to find a word that really encapsulates what top performance looks like. And it's people who perform at the top 5% level at the price point you can afford, right? To do that, I used to think if you had the skills or competencies, that was enough. And what I've realized is I was completely wrong. Those are useless if it's not deployed in the right culture, in the right company. And you need both. You need skills or competencies match, and you need culture and company match. When you have both, that's when you can deliver top 5% performance. If you're a team leader and you want to build a team with rockstar performance, everyone on that team must have skills and competencies match and culture match as well. I literally weight them 50-50. So as I do executive search, and I'm working on a bunch right now, I weight skills match or competencies match 50%. I weight culture match with the company 50%, which basically means I find them, I blend them together and average them. Remember, I told you I was a simple guy. And if the score is 8, 9, or 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, we've got ourselves a potential winner. If it's below 8, we move on. We will keep that position open for weeks or months or quarters if we have to, until we find someone who meets on both dimensions, skills and culture. Reason being, what good are the skills and competencies if they're not going to be successful at our company? And what good is the company match, meaning we like her or we like him, but they can't do the job? We need both. And I weight them 50-50. That's really evolved for me over the years. Now, skills is the easy part. On the margin, I always give the benefit to the culture match. It's that hard to find. Skills I can teach, I can train, I can mentor, I can send to a class, I can do all kinds of stuff to develop skills and competencies. Culture match, as it turns out, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, much harder to change. So why don't people get this right? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. Some people literally are too lazy to figure it out. Remember, I said it's simple, but not easy. I'm going to give you some practical tools in a few minutes to do it. Others are too desperate, right? We're looking for a job. I just got laid off. I got to find a job. I don't have time to bother with culture fit or culture match. And so they wind up in a company that's not a culture match. If you're hiring a team or building a team, again, Sally gives notice on Tuesday. I've got 2 weeks to find her replacement. Same thing. I'm too desperate. I don't have time to find someone with culture match. I just need someone that can keep our pay-per-click campaign on Google going, and I don't have time for culture match. Another reason is people are really, really good at BSing themselves. They're not in tune with their own preferences and needs. And I talked about a few of those a minute ago, and I'll give you some ways to figure that out for yourself shortly. They never learned how, right? This stuff is not taught in school, not taught in most books. Unless you read all the HR journals and research studies like I do, which will put you to sleep, you're probably not going to know the science behind it. And then finally, the few companies that do think about this or do talk about it absolutely drop the ball when it comes to actually putting it into practice. So there's a lot of good reasons that this doesn't happen, whether you're looking for a job or looking to hire someone for your team. And a lot of this comes from just mistakes. And I hope to help you avoid some of those mistakes that have given me all this gray hair. Here it is. I mean, if I had to boil this down in a nutshell, this is what you paid to attend this webinar for. And I guess you could leave if you want after. It's DNA. I didn't discover DNA like the scientific DNA, but I learned one thing that opened up everything for me. And this was about, I don't know, maybe 7 years ago. Turns out psychologists have come to the conclusion that most of us and our inherent personality characteristics are hardwired by the time we turn 8 years old. Those of you that are parents know exactly what I'm talking about. And I've got 2 kids, same physical DNA, but they could not be more different, which is bizarre to me. But it's true. The scientists, the psychologists will tell you if you are going to be musical or creative or anal retentive or attention to detail, or you're going to be funny or quirky or any of these long list of characteristics, it manifests itself by the time you turn 8. The key exception being there are certain types of trauma which can fundamentally change our wiring. And we're not going to cover that on this call. But for most cases, the person at 8 years old is the person at 28 or 38 or 68. Okay. Again, if you're a parent, you know what I'm talking about. And so what I started to realize was if I could find people, if I could find individuals to add to my team who were wired in a way that I didn't have to manage or micromanage or babysit them because they were hardwired to perform and behave in the way that our team did, then I could teach them the skills and competencies within reason. Similarly, most of the hiring mistakes I made over the years, and I've made a shit ton of hiring mistakes, were almost all DNA mistakes. The person I thought I was hiring was not what I was hiring. Again, Jekyll and Hyde. So DNA is the key. It's the key thing. Now it's hard. Again, simple but not easy. I'm going to give you some strategies in a minute, but I just wanted to level set that this is what it comes down to. Let's do a quick 60 seconds on this, because I'm not talking about building a team that has no diversity. I'm talking about building a team or joining a team that is constructed of people that share this common DNA. Research shows that does not have to be a team that's not diverse. If you don't have a diverse team, you've got a candidate sourcing problem, which is a topic for another webinar, which I'm happy to have if you like. But that's not the same as hiring DNA or knowing your own DNA, right? I've built many diverse teams over the years for myself and for clients where we had a very tight DNA, but people came from all backgrounds in every respect. So here's the problem. If you're a team leader, if you hire a team, what most of them do is they focus on the wrong things. They focus on things that have been proven in research to not be predictive of candidate success. And I think the reason they do this, aside from the fact they haven't read the research, is these are easier to find. They're easier to see. They're on a resume. You worked at Google, you went to Stanford, then you went to Harvard Business School, and you had this title. You must be great. Well, maybe, but that doesn't mean you're great for this role, or doesn't mean you're great for this particular company or culture or DNA. That doesn't show on the resume. That takes some more digging. And so this becomes just this shortcut. I guess you could kind of say it's laziness. And again, when you're desperate, when you got 2 weeks to hire someone, I guess I understand. But then you can't be surprised when your hiring accuracy is 50%, which, by the way, is our national average hiring accuracy. We could all skip this entire process, forget the webinar, forget the process, flip a coin, and you'd wind up with 50% hiring accuracy, which is our national average. My goal for you is 90% accuracy. You'll never get to 100%. But if you can get to 90%, if you're a team leader, you can create an unstoppable culture and team. And if you're an individual and you get 90% accuracy, you can name your ticket in your career. It's that unique. It's that powerful. So the smartest team leaders, instead of focusing on that other extraneous stuff, is they focus on DNA, which is the best predictor, according to any research I've ever read, on how that person is going to behave and perform the day after you hire them. And then I can teach them the skills, the competencies. I can bring them up to speed on the latest technology of ad tracking or whatever it is. But I can't fundamentally change DNA. And every time I find myself micromanaging and babysitting, I realize I made a DNA hiring mistake. So if you hope to be a team leader, maybe you've never hired a single person in your life, or maybe you're a CEO, or maybe you're an entrepreneur or a VC investor, private equity investor, I will tell you as a headhunter who does searches for leaders that when I find someone who knows how to do this, I have found someone who is largely unstoppable in their career. It's the number one characteristic I have trouble finding. So people say, well, how do I get headhunters to notice me? And I'll tell you the answer is to learn how to do this and practice it over and over for 25 years till you have gray hair, and then you'll have something, because this is pretty rare. Now, let's say you're a job seeker, a candidate, flip side of the equation. What most people do is they look for a job opening, and they do that on LinkedIn or ZipRecruiter or Indeed or 1,500 other job boards, and they sit there and click apply, 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 apply all day long. I've seen people put a rock on a keyboard and it just clicks apply, 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 apply. And they just play the numbers game, and they hope to find a yes, which to me is ridiculous. I mean, you wouldn't find a partner or a spouse that way, but that's how most people go about the job search process. And then they wonder when they join a company that happened to pick them, why there's a better than average shot that they didn't get a culture match. The best, smartest job seekers, candidates, methodically think about the companies where they would be a match. Then they go after those companies. And I did a whole nother webinar on this that I'll give you the link to a little bit later, that step-by-step walks through how to do it. And I've actually seen companies create roles for candidates where they said, oh my God, we have to find a room for her somehow. And magically they make a position. So again, it's opposite of just clicking apply, apply, apply. But that's what most people do. People ask me, isn't this as simple as an online test? No, I wish it was. The research is very, very mixed on the accuracy of online assessment tests. Yet I have clients that require an online assessment test, and we could talk for a long time about that. What I will tell you is that the data is mixed. There's a few of them that are okay. Most are crap, not validated in any way, shape, or form. To be really validated, you need an enormous sample size, and you need decades or years of proof. And so most online assessments are not worth anything. More importantly, it provides a pretty bad experience for the candidate, which in a candidate's market is a big limiting factor. But the biggest issue is most of my clients who insist on online tests completely ignore the results. To which I say, well, why are we doing this? If you're just going to hire her or not hire her anyway, why are we spending money, time, and losing candidates on an online test? You don't need to use an online test. You just don't. And I will have that debate with any CEO of online test. I've had a few of them on my webinar, on my podcast, and we debate it all the time. It starts with knowing your own DNA, and you don't need an online test to know that. There are some career and personality profiles for yourself that are very useful. And by the way, happy to send you this deck so you don't have to scramble to write everything down. But here's some questions to ask yourself. What did you love doing as a kid? Right? Brush off the 8-year-old version of you. And I can tell you that if you were musical or creative or expressive, or you loved writing, or you were detail-oriented, that's still kind of in your DNA. And imagine the performance you could have if you found that type of organization or that kind of team. Think about your best job, worst job ever. What was it about it that lets you click with that organization so well, right? Role models. Who do you aspire to be? Who do you admire? What is it about their DNA? Ask people who know you really well. Your friends and family know you really well. They've known you a long time. Ask them, hey, be honest with me. Am I this or that? Am I extroverted or introverted? Do I do best when I'm in this situation or that situation? Ask your mentors, former bosses. Enter the danger and have that discussion with them. You might be really surprised by what they tell you. You might have thought you were great at this. Turns out you were great at that. And I don't mean skill set. I mean the environment that you performed in. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what I can tell you is it's your job. It's not your boss's job, and it's not your employer's job. Your boss is not a career coach, probably doesn't care about your career, sadly. Your HR team, not their job. It's your job to understand how you are hardwired. And the sooner you figure that out, the sooner you can join a team that understands that and can embrace it, and you'll find your tribe. And it's just so liberating. I've only had the chance to do that a few times in my life. I've joined quite a few that were not my tribe. Now, let's say, flip side, you lead a team, okay? You lead a team of 5 people, or you lead a company of 5,000 people. Maybe you're starting a company. You're going to hire your first 3 people, your first 10 people. How do you figure out your company's DNA? What I can tell you is your company already has a DNA. Now, you may not have been mindful about it. Maybe it's high performance, maybe it's not, but you already have one. So how do you figure it out? I've gone through this process with a bunch of companies. They engage me, they come in, I come in for a day, and I kind of help them figure it out. And here's the shortcut. In the book, I talk a lot about how to do this. You bring together your core team. What's your core team? These are the people like your CEO, your head of talent, that sales guy that's been with the company for 5 years. Everyone kind of knows this core team of 5 or 6 people. And I asked them all the same question. Who are the 3 people that we would all agree are the rock stars of this company? Kind of the backbone, the people that if they left, we would cry ourselves to sleep. And wouldn't you know, everyone kind of names the same people. It's Sally in sales, and it's Charlie in finance. It doesn't matter their level, location, but they're just the essence of the company. And by the way, it can't be anyone in the room. And then I say, okay, so now we know who they are. What do they all have in common? And we throw it up on the wall. And sure enough, wouldn't you know, they all have these characteristics in common. And I forced the team to really think about the words and put a framework around it. And then we group it and we kind of, move the sticky notes around, and you can kind of envision that whole process. And at the end of the day, what we're able to do is find a few defining characteristics or DNA of the company or the team if it's a bigger company. And it's magical because now we actually can put words against this. We can actually hire people who have the things on those sticky notes, whereas before it was this ephemeral kind of gut feeling. And I can tell you that hiring by gut feeling is going to get you into a lot of trouble. People say, this is a bunch of crap. This isn't crap. Words really matter. I force my clients to, on a piece of paper, write down these 3 to 5 things in a way that is inarguable, so that when I interview candidates, or when they interview candidates, or assess candidates, or do reference checks on candidates, we know what we're talking about. Are they self-critical? Are they helpful? Are they heroic? Are they punctual? I'll send you this whole list, and there's a lot of others. You're not picking from this list. That's not the goal. The goal is to be authentic and figure out what is your team's culture. Now, in a startup, a lot of times it comes from the founder or co-founders, and that's normal. But if you have a team, or you've inherited a team, maybe you joined a company and you took over a team of 7 people, the very first thing you should be doing is, who the heck do I have on my team? And what is the DNA of my team? That will help you for your future hiring. So then what do you do once you figure this out? The last thing you do, let me tell you the last thing you do, is send out a cheesy email saying, we had a meeting and we figured out our DNA, and here's 3 bullet points. You will be laughed out of the room. That's not how you socialize your DNA. It's an unspoken thing, right? It's that ephemeral. You over communicated over and over and over until people literally taste the puke in the back of their throat that 20,000th time you say it. That's when you know it's authentic. And you give specific examples of what it looks like to live that DNA, which of course starts with you. You commit as a leadership team to never hiring another person so long as you shall live, no matter how good their skills and competencies are, if they don't match your company's or your team's DNA. So they're straight out of central casting. They've done this job for 5 years. Their metrics are unbelievable, but you're like, I don't think she's a culture match. You don't settle. You don't hire her. You keep looking. And as soon as you hire her, everyone knows you're full of it. And this whole thing, this whole illusion disappears. Here's the hardest one. You've inherited some people, or you've hired them who are mismatches. And if you're serious about this, they have to go. Now, they don't have to go today. and they don't have to go rudely or without thanking them for their contributions. And there's all kind of ways to have a graceful exit, a graceful leave. The book talks about that as well. And it can be done. You have to be very careful how you do it, but they have to go. If they're allowed to remain because, well, she just knows the system really well, or he has the relationship with our biggest customer, or we got to make the quarterly numbers. As soon as you do that, again, everyone knows you're full of it on DNA, which means you're full of it on culture fit, which means, well, you know the rest of the story. Okay, so let's get into practical strategies that I promised you. So you're a team leader. You're building a team. You're hiring. What kind of questions are you asking? I'll tell you the kind of questions I ask and that I teach my clients to ask. And by the way, there's no magic in these questions. The magic is in the answer we're listening for. Okay. And by the way, I don't, I take careful notes in interviews. You should be doing that too. I find it really hard to bang on a keyboard without the other person thinking like, is this a robot? So I still write things by hand in an interview, and then I transcribe them or take a photo of them. But that's interview 101 we could talk about. What were you like as a kid? I love starting interviews this way because the candidate thinks it's small talk and they assume I'm just, this is like, tell me about yourself, which is a question that you'll never hear me ask in an interview. I say, so Sally, what were you like as a kid? Like, what were you like as a teenager? What kind of things did you do? She thinks it's small talk. It lowers the pressure in the room or on the Zoom, but it's actually one of the most important questions I ask because I get the authentic Sally. She was a violinist and she worked 3 hours a day and never made her parents happy, and that developed this insecurity. And by the time that question's over, I have a pretty good sense of the DNA. I don't know it for sure, but at least I know where I'm heading, right? Huge question. Tell me about your best job. Best job you ever had? Best boss you ever had? That helps me understand where the person thrived. Similarly, the job you hated the most, what did you miss? Why did you take it? How long did you stay? Why did you finally leave? That helps me understand where they didn't do well. So then what I'm doing is reverse engineering into my organization, my culture, and saying, okay, is it similar to the one she thrived in, or is it similar or like the one she didn't do well? In which case we are opposites. Thread of reference check. I learned this from my friend Jeff Smart. Thread of reference check, which basically means, and I have this exact phrase in the book, when I speak with your references, what are they going to tell me about X? And you'll be amazed how the walls open and the floodgates open and you get your real answers. Thread of reference check. And then finally, tell me about a time you demonstrated X characteristic, where X is that DNA characteristic that we talked about earlier. So if we find one of our DNA characteristics is perfectionist. Now, that's not right for every company, but let's say my company, my team is a bunch of perfectionists. We are developing a new heart implant. We better be perfectionists. We're literally saving lives here. Tell me about a time you demonstrated perfectionism. And she'll tell me the story. And I say, great. And I write it down. Tell me about another time. Because she already had the first one memorized, right? And then she tells me another example. I say, great. Tell me about another time that you demonstrated perfectionism. And you know what? If I interview someone for an hour, they can tell me story after story after story where they demonstrate perfectionism. They can't fake it for an hour. You can fake it for one question. You can't fake it for an hour, at least not with someone who's really focused on this. So there are some key questions, and there's a bunch of others in the book, happy to share them, that help you get at DNA. It doesn't appear in a resume. It's not as easy as a job title or a former employer or what school they went to, but don't let yourself off the hook that you can't find the answers to those questions if you're asking the right questions. Most people don't ask these questions, by the way. Okay, you're a job seeker. You're a candidate. It's the flip side. First of all, ask the hiring manager questions about DNA. The first question I get sometimes is, tell me about your benefits. I'm like, really? That's your most important thing? Seriously? Is our benefits? Don't you want to talk about whether you're going to thrive here and the culture and what kind of people we hire and what's important to us and how we make decisions and all the other stuff we just talked about? Ask the same question of a bunch of different people. Now, this is super annoying when a bunch of people at the company ask the candidate the same question. Don't do that. But if you're the candidate, the job seeker, if you're interviewing, Ask the same question of 5 people. And if you get 5 consistent answers, that's very indicative. It's a marker of a tight, cohesive culture, organization. They're not all brainwashed. But if you get a bunch of different answers, they don't know the priorities, they don't know the strategy, different people make different decisions in different ways, that should be a clue. That should be a warning sign. Great question. Tell me about someone you exited, meaning you walked them to the door recently because of culture match, not performance, because of culture match. And if she can't think of anyone that she's let go over the past 2 years due to culture match, that tells you that they may not be living and breathing culture match, like we talked about. She should be able to say, yeah, had a top performing sales guy. He was amazing, always President's Club, but he beat the hell out of our marketing team and I just couldn't do it anymore. It was not consistent with our culture match and we had to part ways, right? That's kind of what you want to hear. Asking for their explanations, their details around their Glassdoor reviews. Glassdoor.com is the first place that most job seekers or candidates go when they interview with a company. Now, be very careful about how literally you take that information. Different discussion, but it is absolutely fair game because it's public information to say, I read a bunch of reviews on Glassdoor and people talked about how dysfunctional the decision-making process is. Do you think that's fair? Is there any fair aspect of that critique? Or do you think that's just a bunch of people that, are grumbly and see what the hiring manager says, right? Really indicative. Also look at the scores, of course. If it's a CEO approval rating of 30% out of 100, you might want to reconsider your decision. Finally, if you're a job seeker, don't wait to be asked about your DNA match with the company. You've done all this research. I'm going to show you in a minute how to do the research. So the DNA of the company. You think you're a match, but don't wait to be asked because most hiring managers, like I've already said, are not going to ask you. You have to go out of your way to answer the unasked question, which is to prove to the hiring manager that not only do you have the skills and competencies, but you have the DNA match with her organization to thrive at that company. When you do both pieces, she's going to hire you almost without question. I've seen it happen. But you can't do that if you're clicking apply 1,000 times because you don't have the time to do the research to understand the DNA. You need to target a short list of companies. Herb Kelleher, who started Southwest, arguably a company that has and had for decades the most tightly well-defined culture, right? This is a company that's been written about literally Harvard Business School cases. Hire for attitude and train for skill. Right? You hire the flight attendant who's funny, who's happy, who loves people, who hides up in the luggage bin and surprises people when they open the luggage bin. You can train her on how to use the oxygen mask, right? You cannot train her to love people. And that's what we're trying to do, whether you're a candidate or whether you're a team leader. Now, quick time check. We got 10 minutes left. And as I said, we're going to be done in 10 minutes. If you need to leave, I understand. I'm going to stay on for Q&A if you want. I'll stay on as long as you want. Okay, so your team leader, what are you using to figure out if this candidate sitting in front of you matches your DNA? There's a few tools. Again, I outline a lot of them in the book. Structured DNA interviews. That's different from the competency interview. What I've typically done is had the hiring manager interview for skills and competencies, and 3 other interviewers interview for DNA match. Separate the two. There's a bunch of reasons for that, but a total of 4 interviewers. You don't need 14 or 40. 4 interviewers is a great number if they know their parts in the process. I look at the candidate's job search process. I ask them, and I play dumb, play Columbo. What other companies are you talking to? Or what other types of companies? And if I see a person who's disjointed and all over the place or talking to companies who's don't even have a consistent DNA, I know I'm talking to a random, not methodical candidate who's not focused on finding a DNA match as much as I am. I even listen to the questions they ask. Again, if the first question from them is about benefits versus about my company's DNA, that tells me a lot about the individual. The test drive is the single biggest thing. It's chapter 6 in the book. We talk all about it. How to construct a test drive where you see the candidate in action. That's where you see their DNA come through. Interviews are notoriously unpredictable. You have to do them. Unfortunately, there's no other way to narrow it down. But once you have your final 2 or 3 finalists, put them through a test drive, pay them if you have to. Best investment you'll ever make. Backdoor reference checks where you're talking to the person's former manager. Someone who's worked with that candidate for 3 years is in a much better place to tell you about their DNA, their hardwiring, than an hour or two in front of you in an interview. And I focus my reference checks on DNA, not on skills and competencies. Again, I can teach on skills and competencies. I want to know what she's like on a bad day. I want to know how she makes decisions. I want to know the types of people that she gets along with. I want to know if she's political animal, which may be right at my company if it's a very political environment, right? So we talk about that. When I find a DNA match, I will do anything possible within my power to create a role if I don't have an open role. That's how rare it is to find someone who is a DNA match with your company. When you find someone, I'm not saying someone you like, I'm not saying someone you want to hang out with, get drinks with, I'm saying someone who's a DNA match with your company, do whatever you have to do to create a role, exit someone, top grade someone, stay in touch with the person so that they can be your first call when someone gives notice. You want to build a Rolodex of people, a list of people who you go to as soon as a role opens up. This is what I meant earlier when I said as a headhunter, I long for leaders who know how to do this, who basically collect a bunch of talent. They collect talent and they assemble it. That's the number one part about being a leader, whether it's 5 people or 5,000. And then finally make a 30-day decision. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, you're a candidate. You're looking for your next home. You're looking to join a company. There's a ton of things you can look at, right, to make this decision. Glassdoor, we've talked about. What is the company's officing strategy? Don't just assume. Don't just take it for granted. If I'm expected to be in the office once a month, 3 times a month, but I live 1,000 miles away, you have to understand the implications of that decision. Talking to current employees, as many as you can. Talking to former employees, that's fair game. You look them up on LinkedIn, you call them up. Hey, I'm thinking about joining this company, or I'm interested in joining this company. What can you tell me about the culture? What's it really like to work there? You'll be shocked by what you hear. Again, this takes time. You can't do this with 1,000 companies. You can do this with maybe 12 or 24 companies, the ones who you're proactively targeting. Shadowing an employee. Hey, can I hang out with you for a few hours or for a day to understand? They think you're watching what the work is. You're not. You're watching what the culture is. How do we make decisions? How do we communicate? Is it an email-based culture? Is it a debate and an alignment culture? Test drive. Show you can do the work, but importantly, observe how decisions are made, even if you have to do it for free. Totally worth doing. And similarly, when you do find a company that is a DNA match for you, I would encourage you to worry less about the specific job. Now, that's easy for me to say. Maybe the comp isn't exactly where you want it to be. Maybe the title's not exactly where you want it to be. What I can tell you is I've seen people promoted 3 times in a year to get them into the right seat once they were on the bus. So if you're driving the bus, your job is to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus. If you're at the bus stop, your job is to get on the right bus. And if you do that, water will find its level in a very short period of time. It's that hard to find. It's just like romance, right? If you can find the right match, don't worry what you call it. Just love it and embrace it. At the bottom, I say make a 30-day decision. And I say that because in 30 days, you will know whether you've made the right choice. I actually think you'll know in 3 weeks. That's kind of my guideline. But certainly on the very first day of your new job or your new hire, you say, hey, let's pull out our calendars and just write down right now a quick 30-day catch-up. Not going to call it a performance review. It's just kind of a touch base, because it's awkward on day 28 to ask for that, right? So we're going to do it on day 1. Day 30 comes and you make a decision. Did I join a company that I thought I was joining, or was it Jekyll and Hyde? Did I hire the person I thought I was hiring, or was it Jekyll and Hyde? Let's do that after a month at the most. It's not going to change if you've made the wrong decision. If you're a candidate, I would implore you to join a company that takes this stuff seriously. Again, in my experience, sadly, 90% of companies don't take this stuff seriously. They say they do. You're not going to fall for that anymore because I've given you some practical strategies. This means they have a methodical hiring process. If you get frustrated because they're being methodical, do you pull out of the process because your ego is damaged that they didn't just jump at you? Or do you say, wow, they really take hiring seriously? That's the kind of company I would want to join. Now, I'm saying if it's dysfunctional, that's a different thing, right? They're not just rushing to put a butt in a seat. That leader is hand collecting, hand assembling talent under her team or his team. That's the kind of team you want to be on, not the team that just hires people willy-nilly and they have a turnover problem. And you can tell all this from LinkedIn. You can see the churn. People tend to leave after a year. There's a reason for that. They take the time to assess your DNA, and they're not insulted when you ask questions about their DNA. They understand it's about a two-way match. So if you can find a company that takes talent seriously, back to the first slide, that becomes your competitive weapon, your competitive moat, and you're joining a company that's likely going to be successful more often than not. How do you know when you found your tribe? Things flow. There's a whole book about this, flow. You lose track of time because you love the work so much. It's called flow. That's a good sign you found your tribe. It's hard to do that flow when you're with people you don't really get on with. There's no BSing. There's vulnerability. And the headhunters like me call and you break our hearts because you keep ignoring us. That's a really good sign that your hurdle rate is pretty high, right? You're not just looking for another 10 grand because you're smart enough to know that what you found is going to be really hard to replicate. I'm not saying settle for being underpaid. What I'm saying is that extra 5 or 10 grand is usually not worth the risk of getting to the other side of the fence, finding out the grass is not green. And then you got to come back to your boss on hands and knees and say, oh my God, I was wrong. Now, if she's smart, she'll take you back because she knows you're a DNA match, but you have burned some goodwill in those situations. Okay. We are almost done. Again, I know if you need to leave in 2 minutes, that's fine, but I am going to do a Q&A for as long as you like. Like I said, you know this after 3 weeks. Whether you choose to acknowledge it goes back to being honest with yourself. I made a mistake. That's okay. I've made mistakes. I've joined teams that I should never have joined. And I knew it after 3 weeks. And usually I don't last for more than a year. That's just me. I have a pretty low tolerance for that stuff. But if you hire someone, and even if you're a 90% batting average, that means 1 out of 10 people you hire is not the right match. And you need to deal with it. Again, the book talks about specifically, but the crib notes are you have a discussion that is a heart-to-heart. I'm not firing you for performance. I'm not terminating you. We're having a heart-to-heart as 2 adults, which is that we both made a mistake here, and start to talk about a graceful leave, a graceful exit. You can absolutely do it. I see it done all the time. All the time. Okay, I'm going to start to wrap up, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. A couple of quick signs that it's not working. You feel it's grinding, and you're frustrated by things that everyone else doesn't seem frustrated by, and you kind of think they're crazy. You probably made a mistake. That's a pretty good clue. So where do you find candidates? And then we're going to wrap up. If you're hiring, and then where do you find companies if you're a candidate? If you are a team leader, you're hiring, your number one source should be your employee referral program. 50% of your hires should be coming from your employees. Think about it. They have a DNA match. They've already proven that. They know people who are a DNA match because we associate with people that are like ourselves, not in a diverse way, but in a DNA match way. 50% of your hires, your former hires, your alumni, you should have an alumni program, super easy to set up. Some of them will come back as boomerangs, and others will refer people who say, best company I ever worked at, or she's a great boss to have worked for. So build your employee referral program and your alumni program, and then proactively reaching out. If you are posting and praying on job boards, hoping to find someone who's a DNA match, let alone a competencies and skills match, you're going to be waiting a long time, especially at a 3.5% unemployment rate. Ironically, we are at a record high employee disengagement rate. So we're at a record low unemployment rate, 3.5%. We're at a record high employee disengagement rate, 50%, which means if I tap 2 people on the shoulder, odds are one of them will say, yeah, I'll talk to you about that job. Half people are miserable and open to a change, but they're not on job boards. You have to proactively reach out and tap them on the shoulder. Okay, you're a candidate. You're looking for your next job. Where do you look? Where do you start? You start with your family and friends. And I don't mean going to work for Uncle Tommy. I'm talking about ask them, about companies that you think would be a good match with you. Again, they know you, right? Same with mentors, influencers. Find people who are wired like you and study them. Go on LinkedIn, figure out where do they work and where did they work. If they were at a company for 3 years, there's a good chance that's a company you may want to consider if they had the right role. And I will say that disruptor companies or disruptive companies or challenger companies do tend to have pretty tight cultures, pretty strong culture match and affinity. Again, go back to the first slide. They've been successful. They've built a competitive weapon, a competitive barrier, a moat. A lot of times it's because their culture is a high performance culture. It's highly functioning. So consider those disruptor or disruptive companies. Great book to read. I didn't write it. No Asshole Rule. Fantastic. How to make sure you don't go work for an asshole. How to not hire assholes. I can use that word because it's on the slide. Great book. Building a Civilized Workplace and Surviving One That Isn't. It's a best-selling book. Some other resources, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. If you want to find your next job, I did a whole webinar on this. It's every step by step by step. Here's the URL. It's tinyurl.com/DNA job search. The moral of the story is don't click apply 1,000 times on a job board. It's make a list of 30 companies and go after them and find a job there. And P.S., they will create a job for you if you can prove to them that you are a great DNA match with their company. So do it exactly opposite of how most candidates do it. Okay, before we open up to Q&A, I promise no sales pitch, but we do have 2 sponsors today. And so I have to give them props. Venturesome, if you're looking for a new job, venturesome.com. This is the world's biggest collection, 95,000 current job openings at venture-backed and private equity-backed companies. It'll email you in alerts and contact you when a job pops open that matches your interests. And again, these are disruptor companies because they've raised outside capital. So I encourage you to check out venturesome.com. Our other sponsor, Shortlist. If you're still paying headhunters, you're nuts. There's a far cheaper way to do it. You can find 10 people who match your exact spec in 10 days, and it costs 10 times less than a headhunter. So if you want to do that, go to noheadhunters.com and check it out. And there's also a 50% offer on the first shortlist. So check that out as well. Okay. Now, with all that said, my book is free. I promised you a free gift. You actually made it an hour. Thanks for sticking around. I think almost everyone stayed. Jeff at recruitrockstars.com, and I will send you the book for free, completely free. It's $28 on Amazon. It sure is free just for putting up with me for an hour. So with all that said, we're going to open it up now, and there's a lid for every pot. That's the moral of the story. No matter how crazy you think you might be, or how crazy you think your boss might be, or what you want at a company, I can tell you that you can find that perfect match. So let's open it up to questions. Now, the best way to do this with so many people on the line is to raise your hand. And I believe that is if you go to gestures or messages or something, you can raise your hand. And if you can't do that, just go in the chat box. I will watch that as well. And Michael Rothwell, thanks for the props on the book. And yes, Jay, I will be sending out a recording of this. So you can type in the chat box your questions. Let's start with Justin. Justin, I'm going to unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. No, I think I can unmute you. Let's see.
I'm unmuted.
Yeah. How you doing, Justin? Let's have it.
Thanks. Thanks, Jeff, for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. I had a question on the words really matter slide that you had. I noticed most, if not all of them, are adjectives, and I find that really subjective. So how, when you're drilling down about what your core team and the trying to find the defining elements of your DNA, do you weather the subjective nature of a lot of those words that matter?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. Don't take the words on that slide literally. They're examples, and one word doesn't always capture what we need to do to define the characteristics. So an example would be, I'll tell you a real life example. So one of the companies I started, we found that our DNA, to be successful, it was tied to our business strategy. So we had a DNA that tied to our talent strategy, was tied to our business strategy, was we were going to hire people who were fearless, selfless, and there was one other, a few years ago. And we came up with specific examples of what it meant to be fearless, what it meant to be selfless. And we could actually describe in words and phrases what that looked like and what that meant to make it objective, to your point, Justin, because as long as it's squishy and subjective, it's worthless. We have to both interview a candidate and chart it on a scorecard, which again is chapter 1 of the book. And we're going to map it out, but we can only do that if it's objectives. Those could be adjectives, adverbs, nouns, whatever. But again, they are DNA. They're not went to a top school. They're not at least 10 years of experience. They are DNA based. But that's a great question. Let's go to Jeff. Jeff typed this in the chat box, so I'll just read it. What if you recently started a new job and realize it's not a match? How do you handle it? You know, Jeff, as I was saying earlier, we're at 3.5% unemployment. Now, that's probably going to change over the next year, but you have a good amount of leverage. If you realize you've made a mistake, my advice is it's best to cut your losses early and move on. Now, you can do a number of things. You're probably still in touch with your former manager. If you realize you've left and maybe want to think about going back, maybe to a different position, I see that all the time. Don't have any pride or ego that prevents you from doing that. There may be other companies or other offers you consider. Right now, the average person turns down 1 or 2 offers to accept another one. So that may be an option. Don't assume that company already hired someone, which is why it's so important to make this decision in 20 to 30 days and not invest 20 to 30 weeks or months. If, however, those doors have closed, then I will tell you that the right time to start looking is now, but not quit this job. You're far more marketable for reasons I won't bore you with from an optics perspective to headhunters, to recruiters, to companies. If you're currently gainfully employed, it also relaxes the financial pressure for you to just take something if you're currently employed. So do the very best you can, but realize, you know what, I made a mistake, fess up to it, make sure you realize what you learned. And by the way, if it's a bigger company that has subcultures, which I usually define as a 500-person company or larger, you may find there is a team or a hiring manager or a group or an office in that company to transfer to. But definitely begin the search. I want to go to the next one, which is it Natalie? And I'm probably going to butcher that.
No, you got it right. Good job.
Please, question.
My question is, we recently had a candidate who went through the entire very long, pretty extensive interview process. The position was a senior full stack developer. We were not 100% certain about him. And at the very end, we decided he's a no. He has sent multiple emails expressing frustration and that we wasted his time. My question is, did we do something wrong? Is there something that we're doing wrong? Or is this kind of like, oh man, we dodged a bullet because this guy was obviously not a good fit?
Yeah. Well, I think he did something right. Okay. I know that's frustrating for him. And yes, I could say, Natalie, next time, do your very best to find it out early in the process. But again, back to dating, you don't know at Starbucks at the first coffee if you should get married, right? This is a process we have to go through together. What I do with candidates, though, and we didn't talk about this, is set expectations and walk them through the process on the very first call. So on our very first 20-minute phone screen, I say, look, we take talent very seriously here. Let me walk you through the process. There's going to be this interview, this, that, and then we're going to do a test drive. Then I'm going to speak with your references and give them every opportunity to opt out and say, you know what? And some of them will opt out and they'll say, you know what, I either have another offer next Friday, then I say, let's not even start because I can't give you a decision by next Friday. I had this happen to me yesterday, literally, and it's heartbreaking, but way better than investing time, right? But I gave you a lot of credit. You knew and you walked, which I know with developers is very hard because it's hard to find a good one. And I would apologize to him and say, you know what? It took us this long to realize it. In the end, you're doing him a favor as well. He may not realize it at the time. And that's all you can do.
Okay. And I have another question,
Please.
if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
Are you familiar with brick assessments, and how do you feel about those?
What was the name of it?
They're a brick, BRYQ.
Yes, I'm familiar with it. I'm not going to go into it in detail. There's a school of thought that online assessments make sense, and I have clients in that category, and I've learned not to try to change them. It's almost like religion or politics. Like, if they're relying on it and they want to use it, great. Unfortunately, most of my clients look the other way when they get the results, and I'm like, then why are we wasting our time? But there are a few good ones out there, and that's on the reasonable list. But I thank you for the question. Let's go to Carlos.
Really appreciate the presentation. Took so many notes. I'm really looking forward to that slide deck because I could not take notes quick enough.
Good.
So it's just two real brief ones. There was a TORC. What did that stand for?
Yeah, great. Thread of reference check. So wonderful book. Who? Jeff Smart talks about a thread of reference check, and I'm not embarrassed to say I learned this technique from him. I had him on the podcast not long ago, and we talk about it. When I say to a candidate the following sentence, when I speak with your former manager, what is she going to say about you, XYZ? The candidate says, he's not BSing me. He's actually going to talk to Sally. I better tell him the truth. Now, I don't mean threat of reference check in a threatening way. I don't think that's what Jeff meant, but it is a highly effective technique. And then, by the way, I actually do check the reference and I see how it matches up. And so it's just a very effective technique.
All right. And then I don't want to change your mind, but I'm trying to provide a little more perspective, hopefully. So twice you mentioned that when people ask about benefits first in a question, so an interviewee. So I did that once and I saw the response and I was like, okay, that's not good. But I dug into why I was asking that question. And really that question for me was based on how well do you take care of your employees? And so, I just wanted to put that perspective out there that it's not necessary.
I get it. I totally get it. Not trying to wordsmith the questions. What I'm looking for, and again, I've interviewed tens of thousands of candidates, which doesn't make me the expert on all things. It just says I've seen the movie a lot, and I find it interesting to discern what are the real priorities for a candidate. So they want to find a home where they can do their best work in, or is money their priority, or is how they're treated or benefits? What are they optimizing for? And it's a signaling thing, right? I'm not saying don't ask the question. I'm just saying, should it be the very first question? That's all I'm saying. I always ask about benefits as I've joined companies. I'm happy to have that discussion. I encourage HR people to proactively provide the benefits so people understand it. And by the way, if you don't have your benefits laid out, sharp so people understand, it should be a selling tool. A lot of my clients don't even have that. We got to scramble to pull it together. That's a different discussion. But should it be the very first question? My opinion is no. But I appreciate the point, Carlos. Let's go to Celia.
Hi, Jeff. Can you hear me?
I can. Hi, Celia.
Hi, thanks so much for the presentation.
Yeah.
My question is because as you said, defining DNA characteristics is really important when recruiting a cultural match. But I was wondering, when you are in a really fast-paced environment, like a startup or a VC-funded company where everything is changing constantly, like the goals, the strategy of the company, and where you're also scaling, so you don't really have a team yet, you're actually building it. How do you go about finding these characteristics? What's what you're trying to define there?
Yeah, it's great. I've started 5 companies, so I totally get what you're talking about. And it's never been more important because the first 10 people you hire are going to hire the next 100. So if you screw that up, it's almost unrecoverable later. But that doesn't excuse you. I understand the pace is crazy and oh my God, we're missing benchmarks and we got to get butts and seats. It's so easy to settle and to fall prey. I've been introduced to people by my VC and I'm like, well, it's good enough for him. It's good enough for me. You're hired. And then I found out, oh my God, he's not a culture match. And it's a real mess. In general, what I will tell you is that early on in any startup or newish company, The characteristic of flexibility is so valuable. Versatile people who can be jack of all trades. And as the business matures or you start to professionalize the business, you do start to hire specialists, but that's functional, right? That's functional. What you want to think about are the DNA characteristics and go back to the business strategy. What is our business strategy? What are we trying to achieve? And what are the kind of people that it will take to achieve that? Are we trying to go for 99.99999% uptime? If so, we need perfectionists. We need people who sweat the details. Are we going to build a company that's all about launching a new product every week? Well, then we need people who are about speed and about being comfortable with ambiguity, right? So the DNA characteristics ladder up to the business strategy. Those first 10, 20, 30 hires are everything. They'll determine everything. I would bet on a startup based on those first few hires. I hope that's helpful, Celia.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. We have time for just a couple more. Are there any other questions? Someone asked about the recording. Yes, we'll send that out. Here's one from Don. Do you suggest asking high-level culture questions rather than specific questions on work processes? Or should the specific question, I'm not sure I totally understand the question, Don, so maybe you can elaborate. But I'm happy to try to take a crack at that if you can elaborate on that in the chats. Anyway, pleasure to spend time with you all. Again, if you want a free copy of the book, send me an email, jeff@recruitrockstars.com. I want to throw up on the screen one last time the link for the webinar on job search strategy, which is here. If you want to find your perfect company, this walks you through how to track down those 30 companies, what to ask, what to research, what to do, how to make yourself brilliant to a headhunter. We do have another question, so I'm going to get to that right now. Let's see. Yeah, question. I don't see a name there. Hi. I do.
Can it be Anita?
Hi, Anita.
Hi. My question is, how long is your screen? I got your questions down, but then when do you get into some of the skills?
Yeah, just so I'm clear, you're the hiring manager, the team leader?
I'm the recruiter.
Got it. Love it. I kind of blew past this, but the 60-second version is that we form an interview team. We create the scorecard together on what it is we're looking for. The size of that team, I have found, and Google in a long-term retrospective study found 4 people to be the ideal size of the team. Not 2, not 20, 4. 1, the hiring manager, the person who's ultimately going to make the decision, interviews for skills and competencies. That is a deep dive interview on skills and competencies. The other 3 interviewers are interviewing for DNA match. Who you choose for those 3 interviews is vitally important, right? Obviously, they have to just bleed the company, the culture, right? when you cut them. So those are the 4 people that we pick. The book, by the way, lays out all the questions that we ask, but that's kind of the short answer. That frees up the hiring manager to make sure the person can nail the job. Now we need the other 3 to figure out. And by the way, the nice thing is those 3 don't really have to understand the job. What they're talking about is the culture and the DNA match of the individual, right? They're not going over the same skills and competencies again, which, by the way, is one of the biggest complaints of candidates, is being asked the same questions over and over and over. It's so annoying. We've all been through it. It's the best way to make a crappy impression on a great candidate is to ask them the same questions. They should almost never be asked the same questions.
Okay, but as far as the executive recruiter making the very first call to identify whether or not they're the right fit to present.
Got it.
How long is your screen?
Yeah. So I do. I kind of view it like dating, right? We're gonna have coffee, then we're gonna have lunch, maybe dinner, right? And only if we check those checkpoints. Coffee's 20 minutes, a phone interview. Then I go to an hour-long video or in person, these days, typically video. And then I go to a 2-hour video, typically. That 20-minute phone screen, I'm just trying to calibrate. And again, the questions I ask are in the book in chapter 3. Do I have reason to believe this person is worth investing the time in? Do I think they might be the right culture match? And I will ask a couple questions on that. And do I believe that they have possibly the right skills and competencies. I don't know for sure. 20 minutes does not tell me the answer, but it tells me whether I'm about to invest my precious time, which is an hour to 3 hours with that individual. I've measured it over time, and my yield rate of that funnel is about 10 to 15%. So for every 8 to 10 phone screens, I go to the next step with the candidate. Does that kind of make sense, Anita?
Yes, thank you.
Great, my pleasure. Any other questions before we draw to a close? There's one hand up. I'm trying to get to who it is. Oh, here it is. Yeah, here it is. Scott asks, how many minutes to review a resume? Yes, glad Scott asked. Forget about me. The data says that 6 minutes, 6 seconds is the statistical average. 6 seconds is all you have. So if you're writing your resume or your LinkedIn profile, you have 6 seconds to convey the information. That's it. You're not going to get, it's not like your hiring manager is going to sit there and say, oh my God, she's fascinating. Oh, and she did this and page 3. Oh my God. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. So when in doubt, leave it out. Don't write a resume as a list of job descriptions, list accomplishments and achievements, which demonstrate that you are worth investing that time in. And again, I've done webinar. That webinar that you see on the screen talks about that as well. Okay, let's wrap it up. Great to see you all. So nice to spend time. I hope this has been helpful. Email me if you want the book. Have a terrific day, and we'll see you soon. Maybe we'll do it again. Bye.